is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China's economy gets off to a steady start in the first quarter. GDP grows 4.5% year-on-year.
Sudan's warring factions agreed to a 24-hour ceasefire after 4 days of fighting leaves nearly 200 people dead. We'll be reporting from Khartoum.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin makes another surprise visit to Ukraine, meeting troops fighting in Kherson. Plus,
is this your next car? I'll tell you why it might be as I report from the Sustainable Sky Summit at Farnborough Airport.
China's economy got off to a steady start in the first quarter. Its GDP grew 4.5% year-on-year, the fastest pace in a year. On a quarterly basis, it's a 2.2% increase. This latest data also shows production accelerated, with industrial output rising 3% year-on-year. Meanwhile, consumption recovered and market sales improved.
So China's first quarter performance is in focus as it represents the first period since the country reopened after 3 years of COVID restrictions. And the 4.5% year-on-year growth is a big jump from the 2.9% in the fourth quarter of last year and has beaten market expectations. Domestic consumption was strong, with retail sales over the quarter growing 5.8% year-on-year. In March alone, retail sales jumped 10.6%. Imports and exports of goods also rose, with the total value increasing 4.8%. As for the country's job market, the surveyed urban unemployment rate decreased slightly, but the jobless rate for those aged 16 to 24 rose to 19.6% last month from 18.1% in February. China has set out a GDP growth target of around 5% for this year. While some analysts doubt whether the growth momentum can be sustained, China's National Bureau of Statistics is optimistic about the country's economic prospects.
China's second quarter growth could pick up sharply due to the year-ago low base effect. With the rise of the base figure in the third and fourth quarters, the growth rate will drop compared to the second quarter. If the impact of the base effect is not taken into account, the annual economic growth is expected to show a gradual recovery trend.
Well, let's talk now to Xiaolin Shen, who's head of international at the investment management company Crane Shares. Welcome back to the programme. Break these numbers down for us. We're coming off a low base because of pandemic restrictions. What can we read into these figures?
Thank you for having me on your program. We did indeed come from a bit low base, but if you look at year-over-year basis, China's GDP also grown over 4.5%. That's, very much in line, given it's only first quarter, like you said, Robin, earlier on, is the first full quarter since the relaxation of COVID restriction in China. What is most encouraging to see is the retail sales figure. Most of the sub-indices in the retail sales, like caterings, cosmetics, and then, even some of the entertainment area is all see a double-digit recovery. So it's almost, you see a V shape of recovery in this, retail sales sector, which is very encouraging and reassuring investors. Some of the questions they have on is China's reopening momentum is on track going from here. This is actually answer that doubts for many investors.
So how much of this strong growth is down to policies and how much is down to other factors?
I think policy is the main driver because overall corporates and household all feels positive because the tone from policymakers from China are very much pro-growth, pro-creating jobs, pro-private firms to play a bigger role in the economy. That's definitely helped the momentum. But on the other side, the revenge spending is actually slowly getting into the economy, get reflected in those numbers. So it is a combination of a policy, also a combination of, people feel more confidence with the potential growth from here, and that's made them feel more comfortable to spend a little.
So you talked about the strong retail sales. How important is domestic demand, Chinese consumers buying products at home, in driving this growth?
I don't have a doubt about China's consumer power at all. In the previous discussion, I think we shared our thoughts on you got to see a bit of the movements, flows in the real economy, job markets and also household potential income become more confirmed, more stabilized, and they start to spend. Spending is very important. I think consumptions in China going to be the key driver for the economic recovery, which is confirmed in Q1's data. And you also see corporates, consuming or consumption is the total social financing picking up, loans number in March also picking up. That's also a fundamental drivers for potentially see job creations, and business movements and potentially income for Chinese household. And eventually the domestic economy itself, in our opinion, could be quite sufficient to keep China's economy going, given the global uncertainties the country faces.
So these figures have been significant somewhat because they represent the first full period since restrictions were lifted. Is China now at the point where the long legacy of the pandemic is in the past?
I would agree in full statement. It is in the rear view mirror, you say, in those status, and then now is full speed ahead and looking forward. If you see President Xi Jinping visited Guangdong last week or the few days before, give a very strong signals of pro-growth, pro-reform. Premier Li visited some of the unicorns in Beijing and the new IPOs, pro-technology self-sufficiencies. It now feels the whole country is focusing on how to grow China again from here, what sectors to focus on, and eventually, we have a strong believer, given the strongest and most great amount of the middle class that China has itself would be sufficient for China to focus on its growth for the current stage.
Okay, Xiaolin Chen from Crane Shares, good to talk to you as always. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Robbie.
Dozens of people are feared trapped after a landslide in Pakistan buried dozens of trucks, killing at least 2 people. This happened during a thunderstorm at the Khyber Pass border crossing, which connects the country to Afghanistan. A rescue operation is underway, with most vehicles stuck under large piles of rocks.
French President Emmanuel Macron has pledged a government action plan in the next 100 days to restore peace and heal the country. France has been rocked by months of protests over controversial pension reforms, which raised the retirement age from 62 to 64. Macron signed the bill into law after it was approved by the Constitutional Court. He's vowed to open new talks with unions, but unions say they will not engage until the pension reform is reversed.
Police in Tunisia have arrested the main opposition party leader, Raki Ghannouchi. Authorities also raided party headquarters and detained 3 other officials. Ghannouchi is one of the most prominent critics of President Kais Saied, who closed the country's elected parliament in 2021 and moved to rule by decree before rewriting the constitution.
A Russian court has rejected an appeal from a US journalist to be freed from pre-trial detention. It means Evan Gershkovich, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, will stay in prison until at least the end of May, while a spying case against him is investigated. Gershkovich denies the espionage charges.
Chancellor Olaf Scholz has called for an industrial awakening in Germany, but doing that will require energy. As Germany and other European countries decouple from Russian oil and gas dependency, other options like hydrogen are being examined. Our correspondent Peter Oliver reports now from Hanover.
Hydrogen fuel cells are already in commercial vehicles like buses and trucks around the world, and increasingly they're being developed to heat and power homes. Refire, based out of Shanghai, is one of the companies developing this technology.
The product that we make are now fitting into vehicles and into generators that power people's homes and power factories, and giving electricities through a very clean source of hydrogen, and that only emits water and heat.
Olaf Olaf Scholz wants to see an industrial awakening with no nuclear and a decoupling from Russian fossil fuel imports due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Germany recently closed its last 3 remaining nuclear power plants, and so Berlin has turned back to coal and liquefied natural gas as short-term solutions.
That's where hydrogen can come in, and it's prompted over 300 exhibitors from 25 nations to come here to the Hanover Messe to show off their hydrogen energy wares. The International Energy Agency say that wide-scale uptake of hydrogen energy fuel cells could cut global emissions by 6%, and the development of carbon-neutral technologies is one of those areas for global cooperation.
I think hydrogen is a very friendly type of energy to the environment. It is more reliable compared with coal and oil. If businesses and governments around the world can adopt this mentality, society will be able to achieve sustainable development.
Just over 46% of the energy Germany used last year came from renewable sources, the vast majority coming from wind. What's needed is a power source to take up the slack when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining.
So we need a new energy source to burn it and use it to produce energy whenever we need it. So at night, when we have no solar power, when we have no wind power. So an energy made of hydrogen is one we can use definitely for the future, and this will be one part of our new, let's say, energy puzzle we need. It's not only hydrogen, but this is part of the whole energy.
Hydrogen power is not a silver bullet to global climate concerns, though. While hydrogen fuel cells do not produce any carbon dioxide, the manufacture of the fuel they run on currently does. While it is possible to produce green hydrogen, this comes at a cost that for now will mean the prospect of 100% climate neutral hydrogen in our homes and transportation may be just out of reach. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Hanover.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. 24-hour ceasefire takes effect in Sudan, but will it stop the deadly fighting?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Sudan's rival military commanders have agreed to a 24-hour ceasefire. The United Nations says nearly 200 people have now been killed in the 4-day conflict.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken held separate calls with Sudan's army chief and the head of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. This as heavy fighting has continued in the capital Khartoum with reports of explosions and airstrikes. Aid agencies say it's nearly impossible to provide humanitarian services and warn that the health system is at risk of collapse.
Let's talk to our correspondent Naba Mohiuddin in Khartoum. Naba, has the ceasefire agreement had any real impact on the ground, or is the fighting still raging?
Ironically, the ceasefire claimed by the two sides now is not happening, because while I'm talking to you right now, I can hear and I see smoke and fire in the sky of Khartoum. I can see gunfire and bombings very close to military headquarters, where I can see it right now. Yes, it was calmer than the 3 days before. People in the afternoon could move cautiously around the neighborhoods, and some people succeeded in fleeing from Khartoum, the capital, to other states like Al Jazeera in central Sudan, and to northern state, some parts of northern state, which is safer than Marawi and Dongola. So the ceasefire is not it's not happening like 100%, and there is conflicting news saying that the military is turning it down and saying they will not allow it because they are suspecting that the RSF militia is trying to get some supplies using this 24 hours coverage. And also they say if there is any ceasefire, they were not part of the coordination between the international community and the two armies. So we probably will not see a ceasefire during this night, but we'll keep you updated if anything happened or took place in the capital, in other Sudanese states.
Now, but can you give us a sense of what life is like for ordinary folks? I mean, how are living conditions? I mean, how challenging is it to get humanitarian aid to those who need it?
Of course, the situation is really bad and it's deteriorating every hour. The situation is vulnerable and fragile and uncertain. People cannot get even the necessities, food, water, power, medicine, anything. Even the wounded people cannot go to hospitals, and hospitals right now are not operating fully because of the limited access and the movement of people, and is not safe yet. So people are living very bad conditions in the capital and in other Sudanese states. There is water shortages, there is power outages, the living conditions are so bad, and already the banks are closed, so people are running out of money, running out of food, and even the agencies, the UN agencies and other international agencies, they can't provide humanitarian assistance right now unless they guarantee there is a real ceasefire, which is doubted. So the living conditions are really bad and deteriorating every hour.
Naba, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Naba Muhyiddin in Khartoum.
Raga Makawi is a Sudan researcher with the London School of Economics. I asked her for her assessment of the situation on the ground in Sudan.
It's quite dire. So for 3 days now and 3 nights, the kind of infighting has been kind of, raging on, both on the ground. You've got members of the military, SAF, kind of engaging in kind of open warfare with members of the RSF militia on the streets of Khartoum throughout. So not just in specific places, they're spread out through the entire city, exchanging gunfires, gunshots. And 2 days ago, SAF had deployed its air force, so it's trying to kind of hit or bomb the RSF's kind of strategic locations, their bases. And the problem is that RSF had, over the past few years, since its kind of deployment of a majority of its troops to Khartoum, they had infiltrated kind of the urban space. They've kind of established their military or militarized installations throughout, various neighborhoods. So it's very difficult to be able to kind of aim and hit them without also kind of affecting, the civilians and the general public.
And Sudan, sadly, is a country that's no stranger to violence. How does what's happening now compare to what's happened in the past?
I mean, obviously, it's a continuation of, these kind of cycles of conflict and violence. However, this is the first time that conflict has erupted in the capital, Khartoum. Khartoum historically has been known to be kind of relatively secure and safe. So a lot of people who are now kind of affected by these kind of conflicts are struggling to kind of come to terms with what's happening. They don't have the mechanisms, tools, or kind of, processes in place to be able to kind of mitigate or deal with the situation day in and day out.
So what do you think might happen next? How might this be resolved?
Well, I mean, it's really difficult to say. And as it stands right now, and what we're hearing from both kind of leadership of the warring parties, they don't seem to be interested in any form of de-escalation. They're not interested in engaging, even with the international community, in order to kind of embark on a new process that leads to a more kind of peaceful resolution. And I think the issue as well is that the processes, the international processes that were in place in country over the last 3 years, whether we're talking about the tripartite mechanism or other political process led by the international community, it feels as if they've lost whatever influence they've had over both generals, and they're not able to kind of bring them to the table again to kind of presume negotiations. At this stage, it might be necessary to kind of involve regional players, regional partners, to kind of leverage the kind of influence historically that they've had over Sudanese state and its major players.
Russia's president has made another surprise trip to Ukraine, visiting the regions of Kherson and Luhansk.
Vladimir Putin met troops and was briefed by army commanders. Kherson is one of the 4 regions of eastern Ukraine that Moscow claims to control. But Russian troops were forced to withdraw from Kherson city late last year after a counter-offensive by Kyiv. Meanwhile, foreign ministers of the G7 countries meeting in Japan have vowed to increase economic sanctions on Russia.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. So, Stuart, conflicting reports over when this visit by Vladimir Putin might have happened. But what do we know about it?
Well, the Kremlin says this is his second visit to the territories that indeed Russia has annexed from Ukraine. The Kremlin says it was important for him to go so he could get the troops' perspective on the situation and to exchange information. As to why he didn't travel with the Russian defense minister nor the chief of the general staff of Russia, the Kremlin said because it would be too, quote, tempting for the enemy to try to potentially interrupt their trip to Ukraine. So that's why the president travelled alone. It is the closest, we believe, he's got to the front lines in Ukraine, having only undertaken a visit twice. The Kremlin says that it was also a way to show his support, the Russian president's personal support for the troops fighting.
And Stuart, what's being reported in Russia about what's happening in those 4 eastern regions of Ukraine that Moscow claims to control?
Yeah, well, when it comes to the military details, Bakhmut is still the focus here in Russian media as well. And one official, an advisor to the Russia-installed head of the Donetsk People's Republic, says it's now 90% controlled by Russian troops. That's up from estimates of around 80 and 75% last week. The Russian Ministry of Defense hasn't given such a figure, but does claim that 3 more districts of Bakhmut were taken. Another Russian official in the Kherson region says that Ukraine is preparing for an offensive near the Dnieper River to try to get across that and into Russian-controlled territory. As to the social situation, well, there was news here in Russia on Tuesday that for the first time in the Luhansk region, mobile internet is once again operational, showing just quite how devastated this region has been.
And Stuart, has there been any reaction in Moscow to these new sanction threats from the G7 countries who are meeting in Japan?
Yeah, new sanctions threats and also a commitment from the G7 to try to stop third parties getting around these sanctions. And the central bank has seemingly responded, not directly, but the central bank governor said they are working on a plan to try to get frozen Russian reserves abroad back in Moscow. She says that there is effectively a negotiation position on this issue with foreign funds from unfriendly countries effectively now trapped in Russia, a kind of financial hostage exchange. So that's what she's working on to try and get foreign funds back. She also says that there are assets now being invested in, reserve assets, for which sanctions will not be any impact. So the central bank working on ways around those sanctions and finding other ways to create a national wealth fund and reserves.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
Well, British military intelligence is reporting that Russia is withdrawing its troops from other parts of Donetsk ahead of a possible new offensive in Bakhmut. Our correspondent Shelby Wilder is in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Shelby, what's the latest you have on the fighting in eastern Ukraine?
Well, after this surprise visit from Russian President Vladimir Putin, Russian forces have actually been stepping up their attacks on the besieged city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. And today, a Ukrainian military official acknowledged that there had been an increase in airstrikes and heavy artillery by Russian forces in and around that city. We'd also seen reports by the infamous Wagner mercenary group claiming to have up to 80% control in that city. And now there's believed to be bloody and intense fighting happening in the city center with close-range combat taking place. And separately, as you mentioned, British military intelligence reports that they believe Russia is redirecting its resources in the Donetsk region to focus on a renewed push to try and take Bakhmut. Now, Russia has been trying to do that for many months, actually, since last summer. But now that we are hearing fighting is happening in the center of the city, Ukrainian forces are desperately trying to hold on. And the battle for Bakhmut has seen significant losses on both sides, but particularly for the Wagner mercenary group, which has been sending in human waves of soldiers acting as a battering ram and being treated as cannon fodder as they try to take this city. Otherwise, news from Ukraine today, there was a shelling in Kherson. It hit a local market. We know that at least one civilian was killed, but others are wounded there. And otherwise, looking abroad in regards to the EU, talks resumed between Polish and Ukrainian ministers today, and that was regarding an import ban announced by Poland over the weekend. Since that time, Hungary and Slovakia also joined in, saying that they were trying to protect their agricultural sectors, but specifically their farmers that had been protesting this surplus of incoming Ukrainian agricultural products and specifically grain. But now Romania seems poised to join this ban unless some sort of deal can be salvaged in the coming days. But again, this was the second day of discussions between Kyiv and Warsaw, and we will see how that unfolds in the coming days.
Shelby, thank you for that. Our correspondent Shelby Wilder in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. The European Union has agreed a $47 billion plan to boost its semiconductor industry as it tries to catch up with the United States and Asia. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels. Alex, tell us more.
Well, Jamie, it's a preliminary political agreement, I should say, from the European Council, the European Parliament and the European Commission. Those three pillar institutions for the EU coming to an agreement which allows this proposal to then go forward to those 27 member states and get that final rubber stamp, that final sign-off. It was proposed by the European Commission back in February, and it basically aims to raise $47 billion in private and public investment to boost the EU's semiconductor industry. Now, the target number for that will be for Europe to represent 20% of global supply of semiconductors in the next decade. So that's a really ambitious target. The three pillars set out in this agreement, the Chips for Europe initiative. Now, that will be building up large-scale production in Europe, about 3.3 billion euros, about $3.7 billion of European Commission money going towards that production, a framework to ensure the security of supply and resilience for that investment, and then finally a monitoring and crisis response system will be put in place, and that's both to prevent any supply shortages but also to monitor any intellectual property theft. This is a big part of this. These are very complicated machines, a lot of complicated technology involved in this, and there will be a lot of looking out for intellectual property theft or corporate espionage. So those are the core features. That $47 billion figure is a little bit shy of what the United States announced just under a year ago. And as I said, the next step is for this to go through the 27 EU member states, and so that will take a little bit more time.
And there'll be lots of views on this, of course. What's been the reaction so far to this deal?
Yeah, it's early days. We had the press conference just a few moments ago from the rapporteur from the European Parliament side of those negotiations. We've seen, obviously, warm words of support from Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, saying that this will power the clean tech industry in Europe and strengthen digital resilience and sovereignty. The Swedish minister looking after this brief, obviously they have the rotating presidency of the European Council, saying that this represents a real revolution in Europe when it comes to semiconductors. But the package itself is lagging behind, certainly in terms of funding from the compared to the United States. $47 billion in the EU, about $55 billion in the United States. There's also growing subsidy races and competition from countries in Asia, notably China and South Korea, boosting their production, already entering in a bit of a subsidy race, a bit of a rivalry between both sides. And so the European Union lagging behind will be the main accusation there, but that is the process that the EU has to go through. Getting funds secured, getting money secured is not as simple as getting Congress to approve the money like in the United States. You've got to go through those 27 member states, as I mentioned. So a little bit of criticism from experts who say that the delay may be problematic, and also it's difficult to find a solution that both benefits all 27 member states equally, but allows the semiconductor superpowers, as it were, within Europe, like the Netherlands and Germany and France, to really boost their production. So a mixed response from industry experts, a lot of support within the EU, and we'll see what the 27 member states say in the next few weeks.
Alex, thanks for that. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels.
Now, is flying without harming the environment really achievable? Well, aviation bosses say that it is, but at a price.
They've gathered at a UK summit on sustainable flying and say the industry is on track to reach net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050, but they say they'll need government support. Our correspondent Catherine Drew reports.
From air taxis to electric planes that could save thousands of tons of CO2 emissions during pilot training.
She is the Pipistrel Velis Electro, which is the first type-certified electric aircraft in the world. She's here, she's now, and she can have an immediate impact.
The future of aviation will look very different, and it could be carbon neutral, according to industry coalition group Sustainable Aviation. It's issued an updated net zero carbon roadmap, saying a 2050 target is achievable through a combination of new aircraft technology, hydrogen power and sustainable aviation fuels, or SAF. Some say the UK needs to act quickly, with its global competitors already heavily investing in sustainable aviation fuels.
So we believe with the right policy support, 75% of our fuels could be on sustainable fuels by 2050. We truly believe that the UK can be a real centre of excellence in the production of sustainable aviation fuels. All of this capacity that we're talking about will be privately funded, but we do need government policy to de-risk that financial investment.
From British manufacturing giant Rolls-Royce with its hydrogen-powered engine to this London startup offering an eVTOL, which they say is the future of personal flying. The companies here are eager to gain market share in what they say must be a sustainable future for aviation.
So this essentially is the flying car. We are not aiming at the commercial market. We don't go into city centres. We're aiming at you or me or your family just having a car that can go into the air. So this is a two-seater for personal use.
Skyfly says its eVTOL, or electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicle, uses less power than a Tesla. Across the board, there's a focus on bringing UK aviation's annual 39 million tonnes of CO2 emissions to nothing. Even the UK's Royal Air Force is preparing its fleet to switch to sustainable aviation fuels.
Moving to net zero can't in any way impinge our ability to deliver an operational effect. But nevertheless, what we're finding with sustainability work is that this allows us to move more resilience, shorter supply chains, and we need to be ready for these new fuels as they come along over the next coming years.
Experts gathered admit air passengers can expect to pay more for flights during the transition to net zero, with an estimated 14% fall in demand. However, Sustainable Aviation says that despite the extra costs, they still anticipate overall passenger numbers to grow 78% by 2050. Catherine Drew, CGTN, Farnborough Airport.
And you can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, and a $1.6 billion lawsuit. We're in the United States. Next.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China's economy gets off to a steady start in the first quarter. GDP grows 4.5% year-on-year.
Heavy gunfire is heard across Sudan's capital, Khartoum, in the final minutes before a US-brokered ceasefire came into effect.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin makes another surprise visit to Ukraine, meeting troops fighting in Kherson.
The trial in the $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit against Fox News by Dominion Voting Systems is underway in the United States. Fox is accused of knowingly airing false claims that voting machines were used to rig the 2020 presidential election in favour of Joe Biden, causing Donald Trump to lose. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. So, John, what's behind this court case?
Yes. Oh, Robin and Jamie, this is the media trial of the century. And actually, they've just paused for lunch. They're going to come back and begin properly very shortly. This morning, I understand they did seat the jury, 12 men and women. I'm told 9 of them are people of colour. And at 17:30 GMT, the opening arguments will get underway in about 40 or 50 minutes from now. Now, the background to this is that news broadcasting on the telly in America is partisan. Okay, it just is completely normal here. So Fox and Fox Business, they affiliate to the conservative cause, that's the Republicans, and people like MSNBC and to a certain extent CNN affiliate themselves to the liberal or the Democratic cause. And millions of people in this country still think that that election in 2020, won by Joe Biden, was somehow rigged. It's just a fact of life. Millions of people do. The country has moved on, but you'll never convince them that it wasn't. So enter this story. Dominion, a company we've never heard of before, really, based in Toronto, founded in Denver, Colorado, and they make voting machines. Now, in most of the world, when you vote, you put an X on a piece of paper, don't you? Well, here in America, you very often are confronted by a machine. You press the button or you pull a lever, and and that's how your vote is marked. And so Dominion is now suing Fox Corporation for defamation or libel. They want $1.6 billion worth of reparations. Fox says that's just ridiculous. We're not paying it. Everything we said, there was no malice in it, so let's go to court. And that's where they're going to be very shortly. Now, what did Fox say? Well, on Fox News and Fox Business, the tone after the election was that the election had been rigged and it was Dominion's fault. That was basically the tone. And they did this through a series of guests whose views went unchallenged, and by anchors who said things like, I know that the election was rigged in Georgia and it was Dominion's fault. Now, that technically is defamation right there. The trouble is, in America, proving it is very, very difficult. It's a very high bar. It's not like in the United Kingdom. And the reason for that is the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, which guarantees the freedom of speech. In America, you can say pretty much anything you like. You can't say fire in a crowded cinema, but apart from that, you can more or less say anything you like. So it's going to be a very long court case. It's going to be a very difficult one, and it's going to get a lot of media attention. Now, what makes it particularly juicy is that behind the scenes, while the anchors were saying these things on screen, they were writing to each other and the management saying, look, President Trump is mad. We wish he'd stop saying this. Of course, the election wasn't rigged, all that kind of stuff. They were saying that behind the scenes, telling their viewers a different thing altogether. And now some of the big names, people like Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson, and even the boss himself, Rupert Murdoch, may well be called upon to testify in this trial, which is in Delaware, about 2 hours from where I am in New York and about 2 hours north of Washington, D.C. All of this assumes that they don't settle before the case really gets going, and many people think that they might actually still do that. We'll have to see. Anyway, the case gets underway proper in about 45 minutes from now.
Meanwhile, John, back on Wall Street, we've had a whole flurry of earnings.
Yes, we have 10% of the S&P 500 reporting their earnings this week. We had strong earnings from the big banks on Friday, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup and Wells Fargo. Some concern about regional banks still. Yesterday we had State Street Bank, based in Boston. Their shares were down about 10% after their profits were a miss because of the banking crisis. But M&T, another regional bank, did okay and their shares were up. This morning, Bank of America revenue topping Wall Street estimates because of higher interest rates. The boss, Brian Moynihan, saying every segment of the bank has been performing well, but their shares are down almost 1%. Goldman Sachs down more than 1% now, lower earnings, losses mounting. They're selling off part of the loan portfolio of Marcus, which is their online bank designed to appeal to ordinary people, as it were, because Goldman Sachs is quite the highfalutin bank in many ways. I think the future of David Solomon, the boss, must be in doubt. It has been for a while. This doesn't help his cause. On the other hand, Goldman Sachs and Apple teaming up today to introduce what they call a high-yield interest rate and savings account for Apple card holders. They'll pay more than 4%, which is many more times than you would get as the national average. Johnson & Johnson, with all those talcum powder worries still, shares down 3% today. They did beat and they expanded their guidance for the year, but the shares are still down. And after the closing bell in about 4 hours, we get Netflix, shares down about 0.1%. Now, this coming just a couple of days after their only the second ever live event that Netflix has ever done live. They couldn't get it on the air. They had to put a card up saying, we're trying to get this program going and we can't. And then eventually they put a card up saying, oh, hang it, we can't be bothered with this. We'll record it and you can see it in a couple of days' time. With Netflix, it's all about subscribers, content, margins, passcode sharing, competition, of course, and their gaming future. And just before I go, some news just in. Southwest Airlines, which had a terrible Christmas, thousands, millions of Americans stranded over the Christmas holidays because of a computer glitch. Southwest, which is like EasyJet and Ryanair in Europe, has had another one today. All their flights were grounded. They are now back in the air. Shares, on the other hand, descending to the tune of 1.1%.
John, thanks very much for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Well, that's the story in the United States. Let's take you to India next, where Apple has opened its first retail store as the tech giant tries to grab a bigger slice of the world's second largest smartphone market. The CEO, Tim Cook, opened the flagship store in Mumbai, with a second outlet set to open in New Delhi on Thursday. Chinese and South Korean manufacturers dominate India's smartphone market, with Apple holding just under 5%. Apple has also been increasing its manufacturing presence in India. Well, let's talk now to Dan Ives, Managing Director and Senior Equity Research Analyst at Wedbush Securities. Dan, good to see you. Apple has been in India, I think, for about 20 years or so, but working via authorised resellers. So how come they're opening their own shops?
Look, I think this was the time. I mean, they feel that they could significantly expand their presence there. It's really Samsung, lower-cost Chinese players. About $6 billion of revenue come from India. It's called 1.5%. We think that could be upwards of $20 billion by 2025. This was the right time for them to make that strategic move.
What strategic importance does India carry for Apple?
Well, I think it's twofold. I mean, one, production. You're starting to see more diversification on iPhone, specifically on some of the low to mid-end ones. Into India, I think Foxconn is going to build out there pretty significantly. And that could be about 10% iPhone production. But a lot of it's demand. I mean, this has really been the market that they've tried to crack. We're talking about, especially in the middle market, a significant opportunity in terms of the Indian market. I think now is the time to strike competitively, put a sort of fence around a potential install base.
And for those of us who are not experts in this field, like you, I mean, what is China's current role in Apple's supply chain system and manufacturing?
I mean, China's the hearts and lungs of the Apple story, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think for Apple, I mean, they're essentially right now taking a page out of the China playbook in terms of what they're doing in India, from both a demand and production perspective. I think it's a smart poker move by Cook and Cupertino, and I think that continues to sort of be the focus going forward.
Dan, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks,
Dan
Ahmed.
Ives, Managing Director and Senior Equity Research Analyst at Wedbush Securities.
The governor of Montana in the United States is considering whether to sign into law a ban on downloading Chinese-owned social media app TikTok on all personal devices. If signed, it could take effect in January, although it's unclear how the ban will be enforced. Our correspondent Adiz Tianchan reports.
A new bill in the state of Montana would make it illegal for users to download TikTok, while allowing those who already have the popular social media app to continue using it. Legal experts say blocking downloads in one state would be impossible to enforce.
The issue with TikTok is something that the U.S. government has to deal with, not an individual state. I was shocked by it just because, like, I've never seen a state take such action due to an international issue. But I guess they felt that the Biden administration wasn't taking enough action, and neither was Congress.
With 1 billion users worldwide, TikTok has repeatedly come under fire merely for having its parent company ByteDance based in China. The social media giant's efforts to store personal data in servers outside of China haven't stopped critics from demanding action. A letter to Montana lawmakers from the American Civil Liberties Union and other organizations argues the bill would unjustly cut Montanans off from a platform where they speak out and exchange ideas every day, and that it would set an alarming precedent for excessive government control over how Montanans use the internet.
We work to educate women about how to save money and pay off debt. And we have 2.3 million followers on TikTok. It is by far our biggest audience. And if TikTok were to be banned, that would mean severe repercussions for me and literally thousands and thousands of United States-based businesses that employ United States citizens. And so that's a big concern for me.
TikTok has become a global platform for companies advertising their products and for activists promoting their ideas. Many consultants working in the digital sector say reaching a consensus rather than banning would benefit everyone involved.
I think personally there does need to be some form of a really serious degree of attention paid to privacy. Not just for TikTok, but for all apps, certainly in the U.S. And I'm hopeful that's what will happen, basically. But I will tell you, I also think it seems likely that this thing could be headed towards some sort of shutdown if a compromise isn't reached.
Although largely symbolic and without significant implications, Montana's move to ban TikTok at a state level sets a precedent in many ways, including government control on social media. And it's certain to keep TikTok at the heart of an ongoing debate on data security and free speech. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, it's a shopper's paradise and a glimpse into all of our futures. We'll take you to China's oldest and largest trade fair next.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country. There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew. And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Exploring new technologies and picking new products is what's brought buyers from 200 countries to China's oldest and largest trade fair.
The twice-yearly Canton Fair in Guangzhou is being held for the 133rd time. Our correspondent Sao Chu-Feng reports.
Thousands of people gather at the Canton Fair's venue every day. Among them are buyers from all around the world looking for potential suppliers. Jorge Valencia from Mexico is one of them. He's not only a buyer himself, organizing buyer groups is also a business for his company. And he's brought 58 Mexican entrepreneurs with him to this session.
And we bring Mexican entrepreneurs interested in many different industries, looking for different products and providers from China.
Visiting the Canton Fair on a regular basis is quite common for buyers here. You get a badge like this for every session you attend. And on Anwar Wayar's lanyard, a buyer from the UAE, you could find badges that were issued more than 10 years ago.
All suppliers are in one place, and easier for us to find what supplier we need for our business. So that's why we came here.
The 133rd session has fully resumed after mostly focusing only on online activities for the past 3 years due to the pandemic, a change the buyers have applauded.
Well, we participate offline, but it's very different that being here in presence with you and all the people face-to-face, dealing face-to-face.
Because we depend on China like 90 to 95% for suppliers, so it affects too much. And we are happy it's finished and we're back to China. Yeah.
To buyers, the Canton Fair is also a window to glimpse the changes in Chinese products and industries every year.
Every year we find many new things, many new technologies, incredible. For example, the electric cars that we have seen now.
Every year we're surprised by the what's happening. Big change.
This hall has been mostly empty for the past 3 years, but now it's full of people. Most of the international buyers I talked to at the event said they are just happy to be back, not only at the Canton Fair, but also back conducting business negotiations with Chinese companies. Cao Chu-Feng, CGTN, Guangzhou.
Mexico is fast becoming a city where people travel by 2 wheels rather than 4.
One of the most congested cities in the world, authorities are investing heavily in cycling infrastructure to encourage those making the switch. And correspondent Alistair Baverstock reports.
Mexico City, home to 22 million people, where cycling is on the rise, thanks to a recent upgrade in cycling infrastructure. The Mexican capital's bicycle-sharing program, EcoBici, recently went electric, and with battery-powered bikes now available at 670 stations throughout the city, more commuters than ever are switching to pedal power.
I use it every day. It's an excellent mode of transport to get to and from work, and I have liked the change. I had been using EcoBici before the upgrade, and now these new bicycles are much better.
And he's not the only satisfied user. In March 2023, EcoBici registered more than 820,000 rides and totalled more than 2 million for the first quarter of this year. For the capital's transport authorities, it's an important shift away from the traffic volumes that leave the average commuter spending 158 hours a year sitting in congestion.
Estableció como un criterio básico la promoción de la bicicleta a la ciudad. Conectar las periferias.
Our aim is to promote the use of cycling in the city by bringing bicycle infrastructure to the outer reaches of the urban area, where people want to cycle but do not have the opportunity. It's a series of actions which will increase cycling volumes in the long term as more infrastructure becomes available.
Irais Maya is a pro-cycling activist in this megacity. She says cycle-sharing infrastructure like this is key for the culture to grow.
De bicicletas compartidas. Bicycle-sharing transport systems are very important for incentivizing people to take up cycling. That was certainly my case. I began using EcoBici to go short distances and gradually increased my use over time to the point at which the bicycle is now my primary mode of transport.
As the Mexican capital invests heavily in cycling, the city hopes more bikes on the streets will start the chain reaction. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Mexico City.
The headlines again. China's economy gets off to a steady start in the first quarter. GDP grows 4.5% year on year.
Heavy gunfire is reported in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, minutes after a 24-hour ceasefire came into effect.
And Russia's President Vladimir Putin makes another surprise visit to Ukraine, meeting troops fighting in Kherson.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.